Previous CII research has shown that integrated project delivery can be a good fit for some industrial projects. Research Team 383 studied case studies, performed quantitative analysis, and can now report on the potential benefits of implementing the Industrial Integrated Project Delivery, or I2PD approach. In this presentation, you will gain insight into improved methods for implementing collaborative and integration techniques, and know which projects are a good fit for I2PD. Here to explain are Phil Barutha, Alison Bradley, Stephen Gabriel, Bruce Burwell, David Jong, Rod Stanhope, and Michael Dubrail.
Hello, everybody. Good. As leaders of the construction industry, it's our responsibility to continue to innovate and positively disrupt traditional mindsets, allowing us to foster an environment to increase our industry's productivity. You may remember 4 years ago in Indianapolis, I2PD was introduced. We're phase 2, I2PD implementation. And our primary goal is the accelerated, successful deployment of I2PD on industrial capital projects. We want to achieve that through implementation guidance. My name's Steve Gabriel with Victaulic, and joining us on stage, we have Alison Bradley, Director of Supply Chain Strategy for Ontario Power Generation, as well as Phil Barutha, Assistant Professor at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. So let's just take a second and calibrate what I2PD is. I2PD is here to create certainty on your projects. We're going to achieve that through collaboration and integration, which is going to ultimately lead to better performing industrial projects. Phil's going to walk us through a little bit of where we've been, the business case, and some of those tools to help us achieve that goal.
Okay, now we're no secret agents like our friend Ani Bond from yesterday. So don't expect any explosions or any fancy cars during this presentation, but we are delivering a lot of content for the next 45 minutes. So let's buckle up, let's rock and roll. Let's start with why I2PD. So 4 years ago, RT 341 found as structured collaboration and integration are increased on industrial projects, project performance outcome certainty significantly improves and minimizes the probability of poor performing projects. Now this chart above shows results of a small sample of industrial projects that were delivered through IPD on the right versus traditionally delivered projects on the left. And we can see with this limited sample, IPD consistently outperformed their traditional counterparts in cost, profit, and client satisfaction. Now expanding on this sample in phase 1, like Steve mentioned, we surveyed 85 industrial projects using elements of collaboration and integration, which Steve said are foundational components of industrial integrated project delivery, or I2PD. Now, we measured or we assessed the number of principles and methods that define I2PD in each of these projects, which a dot represents one of the 85 projects. And we calculated a CI index, the amount of collaboration and integration that was utilized on each of these projects, and that's shown on the x-axis of this chart. Project performance was also assessed on each of these 85 projects. And we use standard metrics such as cost, schedule, quality, safety, client satisfaction, the typical metrics you'd use on industrial projects, and we aggregated all of that together, and we calculated an average project performance, which you can see on the y-axis. Now, as we can see with the rightmost graph, once we get past a certain threshold of CI based on the index, there are virtually no poor performing projects. That bottom right quadrant is void of any dots or projects. Now, if we look at the two left quadrants, our gray and our red, we're not saying that if you're using little to no CI, that your project is destined for failure. However, what we see that the data indicates that it's fairly random success, at least what we were able to find in the data set. With some projects performing extremely well in that upper gray quadrant, but we had some really poor performing projects in that lower red as well. So what is I2PD? Just a little bit of background. I2PD is a relational project delivery method. It combines elements of existing relational project delivery methods such as commercial IPD in North America and project alliancing in the Southern Hemisphere in Europe that's mostly done on civil infrastructure projects. Now, both have origins, what we're able to find, from project alliancing that date back to 1992 in the North Sea. And each of these delivery methods have seen success in their respective markets over the last couple decades, with cited benefits of commercial IPD being higher quality facilities faster with no significant cost increases. And project alliancing projects from down under had over a 99% success rate with average cost savings of 3.5% and average schedule savings of 2 to 7% schedule savings. Defining I2PD, or Industrial Integrated Project Delivery, it's an outcome-focused project delivery method, and there's 9 defined principles that have elements of collaboration that are emphasized in commercial IPD, balanced with elements of integration that are emphasized in project alliancing projects. And combining these together, they create an environment of structured team collaboration and integration of work processes. Now, these 9 principles support 22 implementation methods to execute a project as I2PD. The above list is the 22 collaboration and integration methods. So you'll see these CI methods, maybe a little bit hard to see on the screen, but these 22 CI methods are not newly developed practices through this research project. Many of you are currently, I'm sure, are using these and using them successfully on projects that you're delivering today. But each of these methods help project teams to implement their projects with more team collaboration and more integration. So practitioners have stated really the critical success factor of I2PD is that it is a comprehensive framework, or we could think about it as a recipe of ingredients, really to achieve an environment and structure of collaboration and integration that creates this best for project decision making. And we're using these 9 defined principles that support those 22 methods. And we have a way of measuring the collaboration integration through the metric, the CI index, that was created through phase 1. All right. So now launching into this phase of the research, but using RT341 as the springboard, which found that once we reach that certain threshold of CI deployed on a project and it reaches those high levels of outcome certainty, this subsequent research, which is RT383, investigated how can we accelerate the successful deployment of I2PD in the industrial sector. And really the mission of RT383 was twofold. One, we wanted to test the I2PD framework by validating the performance findings on real live industrial projects. And then 2, we wanted to understand how better to execute I2PD on industrial projects, or how do we better implement I2PD. So the goal of this research project is to provide guidance for all of you practitioners for better implementation of I2PD. An implementation guidebook is being developed, and we'll be presenting the contents of that. And really, we're looking for specific guidance in 3 main areas that will be contained in the guidebook. The first is, what is a good fit project for I2PD? So how do we determine from your project portfolios, all those projects that are in your portfolios, is which projects are best suited, or the characteristics of that project are best suited for I2PD or maximize the benefits of I2PD? The second main area, once we've selected the project, is determining which of the 22 CI methods to deploy on that specific project. So what's the best mix of ingredients to use on that specific project? And lastly, to provide specific guidance to implement each of these selected methods on your industrial project. So each of these three topics are organized in the various chapters of the implementation guidebook. The first, which is determining what is a good fit project for I2PD, makes up the contents of Chapter 2, or the I2PD project selection tool. Now, the research team has developed Excel-based decision support tools that each of you will aid you in this guidance. And of course, these tools are available on CII's knowledge base under RT 383. So what is the selection tool? The I2PD selection tool qualitatively assesses each project within an organization's portfolio to identify those top candidates that will benefit the most from I2PD delivery. Now, the findings of RT 341 indicate all projects will benefit from the use of more collaboration and integration. However, on 383, we had found some of the projects receive more benefits from I2PD, depending on their attributes and characteristics. But when do we use this selection tool? When is the time to use this selection tool? As early as possible. It was developed with the intent to be performed very early in the project lifecycle. So you'll see all of the project phases as defined by CII above, and the selection tool is recommended to be assessed during the latter half of the feasibility phase, so very early on in the process. Okay, now what is a good fit project for I2PD? So the research has indicated projects with higher amounts of uncertainty are better candidates to receive the full benefits of I2PD. So essentially, the more project uncertainty, the more suitable for an I2PD delivery. Now, this project uncertainty could be present in the design of the project or in the project execution or construction phase of the project. There are multiple uncertainties within each project. So design uncertainty, we define design uncertainty using these 9 design uncertainty indicators. Now, another way we could think about it too with design uncertainty is with risk, there also is opportunity. So another way to think about it, it could also be the opportunity to add value to the project through better design optimization. So that's also included in these uncertainty indicators. But these 9 design uncertainty indicators would represent typical risks and opportunities present in the design of your industrial projects. So a couple examples, and Allison's going to go through in more detail on a specific project, but a couple examples of indicators would include difficulty of defining the project scope and potential for scope optimization. Now, our project execution uncertainty, or we could call it construction risk as well, comprises 14 indicators or risks that could impact the delivery of an industrial project in the execution phase. Now, I'm sure many of you are familiar with many of these indicators, these 14 indicators, and I'm sure some of these you're dealing with today. For example, uncertainty of price of materials is one that's on this list of 14, as well as availability of labor is another, and of course 12 others that would be assessed during the process. Now, following assessment of each project, both the design and execution uncertainty within your portfolios, the results of each project are represented graphically here. This suitability spectrum, this would be what you would expect to see following the assessment. Now, we've represented it graphically on this chart with design uncertainty on the y-axis and execution uncertainty or construction risk on the x-axis. Now, of course, the higher the overall project uncertainty, or graphically, the further we get away from the origin to that upper right quadrant, or that green shaded area in that upper right, the more suitable the project's attributes are to receive the full benefits from an I2PD project delivery. So essentially, industrial projects with medium to high design uncertainty combined with medium to high execution uncertainty would be really good candidates for an I2PD delivery. But again, from phase one, we found most projects will benefit from the use of more collaboration and integration. So from this chart here, interpreting this projects 1 and project 2, we would interpret as good candidates for I2PD delivery. So once we've identified that project within our portfolio that we think would be a really good candidate for I2PD delivery, and then the decision is made for it to be delivered as I2PD, now the next step for us takes us to chapter 3, which is selecting the right CI methods to maximize the benefits of I2PD that fit the specific needs of that project. We know that all projects have a little bit different characteristics, a little bit different attributes. So this tool is developed to customize the specific CI methods that hopefully will allow you to maximize the benefits. This tool, so this is another Excel-based tool, will provide guidance on prioritizing the specific methods by project. And again, this is available on the knowledge base for download. So just a little, I briefly mentioned this earlier, but again, we have 22 CI methods to implement I2PD, and all of these methods contribute to increased collaboration and integration. We did find that some of the methods enhance more what we call team collaboration or collaboration of people, while others seem to enhance a little bit more integration of work processes, and then some are fairly balanced. But we do see elements of both in each of these methods. And what we also did find a link to the projects with a strong need for design optimization are really well suited for the methods with a heavier emphasis on collaboration. And our projects, so that would be co-location or front-end planning. Conversely, our projects with a little stronger need for better construction risk management seem to be better suited for our methods with a higher emphasis on joint risk assessment and contract incentives. However, most industrial projects have a balanced need for both design optimization and construction risk. So we would recommend a balanced approach of the various different mix of the various different collaboration and integration principles and methods. Just as a note for informational purposes, we also did identify through the research that there was a correlation to enhanced use of the CI methods if the organization has prior experience and overall institutional maturity with each of the specific methods, which probably seems obvious to all of you, but we did find that statistical correlation there. But phase 2, pilot project delivered by OPG, which Allison will talk about in more detail, did also prove to us that an organization does not need to have experience with the method for it to be effective in an I2PD project setting. So this is what you'd expect to see on the output of the tool. Now this is just a sample using an example of a project with very specific characteristics. The project characteristics we picked for this example here are utilizing cutting-edge systems and equipment. So if your project has that sort of attribute on the project, the output would provide a prioritization of each of the CI methods. And really that tier 1 grouping of CI methods is what we would consider highest priority methods to implement on that project. Our tier 2 are what we would consider moderate priority methods, and our tier 3 are lower priority methods. Again, this allows some freedom and flexibility for each of the organizations and project teams to determine which ones fit best. This just allows a little guidance on which ones may fit the attributes of that project. So now finally, our chapter 4, once the right project is selected and the specific CI methods are prioritized to best suit the characteristics of the project, the final step is the how and when to implement each of these methods that are deployed on the project. In order to do that, we wanted to provide some specific examples from real live industrial projects on how they implemented and applied each of these methods. We case studied 7 different projects that we studied in detail, and the project teams were asked to describe each of the 5 W's and 1 H of how each method was implemented on their project. You can see here the 7 projects spanned across many of the 5 CII sectors and ranged in size from $130 million to $2 billion, so pretty good sample. Before we get in and show you some examples of that, also wanted to explain wanted to provide some guidance on when to use the principles and methods by project phase. So at what phase should each method be deployed to maximize the benefits, essentially? This was actually based on some survey results of over 80 responses. Here we see some methods should be deployed very early in the project's life cycle. So this is what actual practitioners are, how they're deploying them on the project, at what phase of our 80-some responses we got from project teams. So we see some very early, such as front-end planning, which would be early in that feasibility phase, and then others deployed later, such as alternative scheduling method, which would be more the detailed design and into construction phase of the project. Now this is what you could expect to see in that chapter 4 for implementation of each of the methods. Again, we're following the 5 W's and 1 H, what, who, where, when, why, and how, as well as some outcomes that your project team could expect to see with implementation of each of the methods. And so I'll just briefly go through how it's outlined. So we're just showing one of the methods here as an example, what you could expect to see. We picked alternative scheduling methods. Some of you may refer to it as pull planning. And you can see here the who would be described in there, the where. So in this case of alternative scheduling method, the big room or co-locate office is where this occurred. The when this method was used, so this would be at the detailed scope and design phase all the way through construction and commissioning. How to implement this method, why this method was implemented, and if there are any specific drivers or barriers to implementation of this method on the project. And then lastly, the outcomes that project team should expect to see with applying this method on their project. Yep. Now it is my honor to introduce Allison Bradley with OPG to describe the first I2PD project delivered.
Thanks so much, Phil. It's always insightful listening to you and your research. It's amazing. So now I'm going to walk you through the I2PD pilot that's ongoing at Ontario Power Generation today. So overall, the I2PD model has resulted in a cost reduction and some schedule improvements as well on our next units, which we'll see on our next units. And you can see here that we were 32% reduction in cost from when we had the original RFP to when we left our validation phase. And on schedule, we saw a 36% reduction in that schedule going through from into validation phase. So it's also improved our project scope and our quality as well, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of my part of the presentation. But I think most importantly, the takeaway on this is that what we saw was 4 major vendors that were putting 100% of their profits at risk to have equitable decision-making across this project and knowing that they'll have majority of execution savings as well at the end of it because they're all working together and they're doing what's best for project. So how do you get started on an I2PD project? So this is my experience, and this is what we've done at Ontario Power Generation. So when we started out, we talked with our executives because we wanted them to have a desire to actually improve and to change. And that desire is to actually have project certainty. So it's not necessarily about the savings. It's about knowing that when we go into that project, that this is what it's going to cost, this is what the schedule is going to be, this is what the scope will be, this is the quality of it. It's certainty. And the second thing we did was we needed executives to actually support change, not going back to our traditional contracting models, but actually wanting to try something different, taking a risk. And then the third thing we did was an awareness and education across the board, not just at the executive level, but in all the departments that would be involved in this project. So that's our engineering and our supply chain, our project people. It was very important for them to feel comfortable and to understand what I2PD was. And the fourth thing we did was with our business partners. We were embarking on something quite different for us, and so we wanted the business partners that we have trust with and that we have worked with for a very long time taking this journey with us. So it wasn't bringing in new suppliers, it was working with the people that we've always worked with. And there's that trust that's already established. So even when we get into situations that maybe are uncomfortable as we're trying a new approach, we all trust one another that we're going to do it together. And the fifth thing on this, which was really key for us, was having a knowledgeable third-party collaborative contracting facilitator along with us, because it is different. And you could fall back into traditional behaviors and ways. And so it was important to have a coach alongside you that would point those things out and pull you back into how we want to behave in the I2PD process. So we selected the Otto Holden turbine and generator overhauls. And this is our first I2PD project, and it's a significant project that we picked. It wasn't a small one. It's one that we are going to be working on for the next 8 years, so it's 8 units. It's located in Mattawa, Ontario, Canada, on the Ottawa River, and it's 243 megawatts of power for us. It was commissioned between 1952 and 1953, so it's 70 years old, quite an old station, but it's a big station. And the project that we selected had program scope that included mechanical, electrical, and some very complex civil associated with it. So, as I said, the execution is going to take 8 years. We're in the middle of our first unit, which is G7, and we expect to have that commissioned end of August. So, why did we select Otto Holden overhauls? We looked at the design uncertainty aspect of it. And we have difficulty of defining the project scope on this project. And the reason of that is because overhauls can be vague. There are embedded parts, there's variation in wear, even between units, and sometimes there's like 20 years it's been since we've actually pulled that unit apart and looked inside it. So there's a significant uncertainty there. Also, we had a lot of integration, as I said, of mechanical and electrical scope. We had a potential for scope optimization and repeatability of this project. So since we have multiple generating units over several years, this will allow us to perfect the trades work, the inspections, the tests, the commissioning through that repetition of units. So it was a very good project for this. And the last thing was the speed to market. It's really imperative that we are reliable, available, and again, these units are OPG's revenue stream. The other areas are execution uncertainty or opportunities. So again, schedule comes up, that need for certainty on it. We are required to apply for our outages through the independent electricity system operator. So we have to be on time when we start that outage, and we need to be finished when we said we're going to be. So being online is imperative for OPG. It's needed by the system, and we need to be there for them. Another area was the availability of skilled labor for this project. I'm sure all of you are facing this. We have availability concerns with skilled trades in Canada. We also had price and availability of material and equipment. So we started this project before COVID, so COVID just added more to it. But we do have a demand right now in the hydroelectric market because there's a lot of major redevelopment and rehabilitation going on in North America. And this is impacting our manufacturers' windows that they have, their shop time windows. So I2PD project does give you that certainty of when things are going to be taken apart, shipped out, and need to come back. So we have very good idea of what those windows are by using the I2PD process. And the last thing here was the number of stakeholders that are required to do a project such as this. We have a lot of internal and external stakeholders on this work. So in summary, there were 9 key areas of uncertainty or opportunities across our design and our execution phases of this project. So that's a really good indicator that I2PD, project delivery model, and those methods and tools that Phil has covered are going to be a benefit to this type of project. So Phil talked about the CI method selection. So I'm just going to walk you through what Otto Holden did. And this was really important for us to work on this and select these tools together, not as an owner dictating what tools would be used on this project. So we involved our general contractor, our engineering, our OEM, and our quality groups that were involved with this. And that was really important for buy-in, to make sure that everybody agreed on the tools we were going to use. And we would only select tools that actually work for this project. So it's not selecting all of them, it's selecting the key ones that will work. I'll just walk you through that. So we used front-end planning, or PDRI, co-location, and we used that throughout the project, in the planning phase, and even at site. Constructability planning in our design phase was used. Use of technology as an integration tool, we used that extensively. We had value engineering. We used a joint risk assessment tool, so all risks were put in by all companies. So we had one register. The multi-party project management team, so we had a team that got together on a reoccurring basis from all groups. The mutual liability waivers were embedded inside the contract. We had a no dispute charter, so we were going to work together. Contract incentives for both a risk and a reward, that was all pulled together as one. And this was key, that multi-party agreement. So everybody was signed on to one contract. And we had formal partnering and team building that went on throughout the process. So I'm just giving you an example here, because I did touch on the technology portion of it. So we use this quite extensively. And we selected those tools together. So it didn't mean that they were tools or platforms that we used in our existing organization. We would pick one that was really good maybe from one organization, or we'd go with something that none of the organizations had. So for example, in here, we used a tool for cost estimating and forecasting that everybody worked out of, document management, schedule, and quality. So overall, the I2PD project delivery model actually decreased the original RFP price by 13% at this point in execution, even with additional scope. So we ran into a problem, a scope item that we weren't aware that needed to be in there, and it was quite kind of on our critical path at the end of the project for this first unit, and we are still coming in at 13% under that original RFP price, because everybody's pooling together to fix that problem. So you can see here that our schedule is currently trending to the original RFP schedule, and that is because of that unforeseen scope. And we've done this even with working through all the COVID concerns and limitations that are going on. So in summary, we do expect to meet the validation schedule on these next units, and so we expect to see that schedule come back more in line with 36% reduction from RFP. So overall, the I2PD benefits for cost schedule, also scope and quality. So we had early cost and schedule certainty. We were going in there quite early in this with some of the scope that was a little bit shaky, but we knew where we were going to land as a team. We had a significant reduction in change orders. And the reason that I know that is we have a very similar project that we used as benchmarking that was running exactly at the same time with quite similar scope, and they saw significant change orders. It was with almost the exact same companies. So it's behaviors. We had the 13% cost reduction, as I said, from RFP. We're seeing schedule savings that we anticipate on our future overhauls. Now we know that that other scope item, where it should land. So we should be back on track with that. On the scope and quality side of thing that was interesting was we did a lot of collaborative scope development together. So it wasn't the owner dictating what the scope was, we worked on it together. And from that, we ended up with a 5-year life extension between major overhauls. So we added some interesting scope in there, and now we know we're going to get this 5-year life extension. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Steve.
Thank you, Allison. So let's take a moment just to do a quick recap, summary. So at the beginning, I mentioned that our goal was to accelerate the successful deployment of I2PD through implementation tools. Phil walked you through 3 of those. You have an opportunity to actually see them live. As we break and go to lunch, it'll be down by the registration desk as well. So let's talk through these 3. First one, project selection tool, right? We've got to figure out what we're going to bake. Second one, we're going to figure out which CI methods we're going to use, collaboration and integration. So what are the ingredients? And then the third is how do we implement these principles and methods on our project, right? How long do we cook it for to get the best result? I am very excited to share that there are a number of industry leaders and their partners that are in the planning or early execution phase of an I2PD project today. So now we all collectively need to take action. Where are we on this list? I urge everybody to bring your I2PD and control project forward today, so that you and your company can realize the benefits of collaborative contracting, and collectively, we can continue to improve our industry's productivity through this research project. Thank you all very much. I'd like to introduce our panelists as well before we take a step back and take questions. We have Bruce Burwell from PTAC, formerly OPG. We also have Michael Dubril with PTAC. We have Rod Stanhope with TVA. And unfortunately, David Young, Dr. David Young, was not able to join us from Texas A&M. Thank you.
Thank you. Great summary, great presentation. Many questions, but in the interest of time, I just picked a few that I think is going to help us summarize things and also be very specific in your answers, please. The first one is, what is the biggest barrier for an owner? What biggest barrier may an owner be facing when implementing I2PD for the first time as a contracting model, and how do they overcome this barrier? What would that be?
I chuckled when I heard that question earlier in the earlier presentation that Mike was moderating, but Allison touched on it. You know, having your support groups buy in early is incredibly important. You know, once you have the senior leadership team, you know, committed to an I2PD project, you need your support groups, legal, supply chain, PM, CMs, whoever. They need to be educated, orientated, you know, and demonstrate to them the benefits that I2PD can bring to a project. Because if they're not on board, they're showstoppers, and they will significantly delay the implementation of this type of contracting model.
Agree. And so you mentioned something. I have more questions, but I'm not going to add them because this is about them, not me. I'll come follow you to the area where you guys are going to be, right? During lunch and after lunch? Yeah. Because to me, it's getting their buy-in. That's the first barrier. How do you sell that? So I'll leave it for later. Question number two is, what are the top 3 drivers looked for by an owner when selecting I2PD project, a project like that? With that approach, I should say.
Yeah, I could speak to that. So at TVA, really our biggest driver is that need for and really demand for project certainty and the advantages that come along with that. We commit, and industry commit big dollars, make big decisions based on really early conceptual type plans, project plans. And if we were able to solidify and lock in a validated plan earlier or as early as possible in the process, it's got to lead to better decisions, certainly more informed decisions. Kind of along those lines, speaking now just as we TVA, we've recently had an initiative to consider the complexity of a project when we set our project oversight strategy. Not just size of the project or dollar value, but really look at the complexity. And when we were in that process, it became apparent very early that there was advantages to integration and collaboration of project teams. If we are able to manage out complexity, and we started to do that, and we kind of accidentally or inadvertently started applying these core I2PD principles and methods, and we were able to do some of that. So when you can manage out complexity, you can increase certainty of outcomes. Again, that was our big driver. And then lastly, not just a driver, but really an accelerant for us is what we've talked about and heard about all week, and that's supply chain challenges. That's extended lead times for equipment and material. It's availability of qualified resources. We're convinced that the best and maybe the only mitigation option is to work collectively as an integrated team, solve those problems in a unified way for the best interest of the project and not act as competitors or adversaries. So maybe that's a quick rundown of what an owner might see as priorities or needs. I can tell you it's created urgency for us at TVA. We've utilized this project selection tool, settled on some really good candidates. We're in the early phases, but we will be bringing pilot projects online, and we're excited and encouraged by what we're seeing.
Okay, very good, thank you.
I'll just add a quick point to that. You know, we've demonstrated throughout the presentation and certainty, and that was the question I had when I first started socializing, running a pilot project with OPG. I had this discussion with our president and our COO, and I said, if we run a pilot project, you know, what do you see as the benefit of this? And he said, I'm not looking for a cost reduction. I'm not looking for a scheduled reduction. He says, all I'm looking for is, Bruce, tell me how much and tell me how long, and stick to it. And this type of contracting model, you know, can give that certainty, but very, very early on at the front end of the project phases here. Is it hard? It's incredibly hard. Okay, we're not, you know, making this sound out as if it's, you know, rosy or anything, especially for this first one that OPG went through.
Okay, very good. So the next question is regarding culture. So think about who will take this one. What culture changes are necessary to move from traditional contracting models to I2PD?
I'll take that one. So first of all, some of you may not know, I'm actually the facilitator on the Otto Holden I2PD project. And I've been involved in the research since the idea came up at the Board of Advisors meeting in the fall of 2015. And I was having a conversation with a gentleman from Exxon this morning. The challenge is, particularly in big organizations, for big organizations to run, they have shaped a culture and a set of processes, and they've promoted and trained people to do things in a particular way. And all of a sudden, here's a new project methodology that has these 9 principles. They've seen these principles before, they've never put them together. And there's these 22 odd methods, and they've never put those together. And you're asking people to step outside their comfort zones. So if I had a longer time, there's a whole science behind how you drive management of change and culture change. And so the critical success factor is to pick the right team. When we were doing the research, we were talking to the folks in commercial IPD and alliancing. They said critical success factor is picking the right team early. So once you've picked your project, once you've got the executive support, once you've got supply chain on board, and legal on board, and engineering on board, it's picking that team. Because if you pick the wrong person, and not just within the owner, within your supply chain partners, if you pick the wrong person, they can radically undermine the project. So the culture and the behaviors you're looking for are that 20% that fit in every organization and every subgroup in an organization that want to embrace change, that are willing to take on a challenge. And they're the folks that don't ask, don't say we can't do this. They say, how can we do this? So you're looking for people that say, how can we do this? And we've had to, on the Otto Holden project, on some other projects we're involved with right now, we've had to make personnel changes. And making those personnel, it doesn't mean they're bad people. It just doesn't mean this project at this time is right for those.
So you as facilitator, Mike, were guiding the team on who to bring to the team?
Say that again?
You as facilitator, were you involved in selection of the team?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Critical part, and the selection of the suppliers as well. And the whole selection process is a collaborative process that involves, as Allison said, all the educated now stakeholders within the organization that the project is going to have to deal with. And you want them in early, so you want them part of the selection. So you end up with this project team and this outside project team that are all kind of aligned. That's the real secret.
Mike's being kind here because I did pick the OPG team.
You did not.
I did. And
you did?
Clearly made a mistake with one of them. He was not a fit.
It wasn't me, by the way. It wasn't me.
Good clarification. Good clarification.
But we identified...
We made that change.
Yeah.
Yep, go ahead.
We identified that early, and we raised it up to Bruce, and they made the change within 24 hours.
That's good. That's good.
That's a key lesson.
Thank you for sharing that. And so you have been learning lessons as a research team as well. Mm-hmm. How are you capturing those going forward from the feedback that you're getting or will get? How's that going to work?
So there's a very formal lessons learned exercise that we're going through, not just from a project lessons learned. OPG has a very particularly good process, but we inserted in that lessons learned looking at it through the lens of this new collaborative approach. So lessons learned on methods, lessons learned on principles, lessons learned on behavior. And so those have all been captured through all the various phases of the project. And we go through a rigorous, almost quarterly, not quite quarterly, but almost quarterly review as we walk through the different phases. So Allison said we're just at the end of the first unit. We're in commissioning. It's only a couple of weeks away from going back online. And all of those lessons learned over the initial planning for Unit 7 have now been used to do the planning for Unit 5. And we've seen significant learning. We completely restructured the schedule. We restructured the work sequences based on what we learned on Unit 7. And we expect, as Allison said, to be right back on track for that validation phase schedule improvement that OPG was looking for.
Very good. So they should come see you guys. You said there's a spot available for you?
Yes, right next to the registration desk.
Okay.
We'll be showing the live tools.
Awesome. And while you're going that way, please don't forget to post your ideas. Bring those to CII, submit them. It's very important. I don't remember a conference where we were so emphatically asking for ideas and suggestions for initiatives and research. Please bring those with you and help me thank this panel for the great conversation and presentation. Thank you, guys.